Okay, well, welcome to Preparing for the Late Stage. My name is Amy Abrams, and I am the Director of Education with Alzheimer's San Diego. I'll be presenting the webinar this morning, and with me today is my colleague, Jean Alton.
Good morning, everyone. Hi.
So Jean will be with me throughout the webinar, taking care of questions and responding to questions or comments that are coming in during the program. So you'll be seeing and hearing from both of us quite a lot throughout the program. So here is our agenda for it's hefty. There's a lot of content in this particular program. It's a big and very important subject. We're very glad that you're here. We know that registering for and attending a program called Preparing for the Late Stage is daunting. It's overwhelming. We will try to keep this informational, but also sort of acknowledging along the way. This is a tough topic for us, and certainly we know for you as well. So what we'll be talking about are, I'm not going to be going into too much detail about the nature of Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. We have many other educational resources that we can connect you to if you need to know more about the disease, the pathology, the typical progression. We are going to be focusing on the physical and functional changes that we're likely to see in the late stage of the disease. Then we're going to talk about ways to stay connected and communicate when a person is losing some of those functional abilities, techniques for offering comfort and helping with personal care tasks, which is an inevitability, unfortunately, in the late stage of these diseases. We'll talk about the transition to the end of life, what that looks like, what you might expect, and some things to be thinking about for the end of life or after death care. And then we'll talk about some resources for more information. Throughout the program, I hope to be covering techniques for coping with all of these difficult aspects of the late stage of Alzheimer's and other types of dementia. So we'll start by talking briefly about what to expect, the physical and functional changes that are to be expected at the late stage of dementia. So first, just to clarify what we mean by the late stage, there is no concrete black and white point at which a person is technically in the late stage of Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. As you can see in this graphic that we use in some of our other education programs as well, everybody's progression is going to look a little bit different. There is a notable absence of numbers on this graph because it's very difficult to chart exactly how a person loses function and over what period of time. It's difficult to predict what that's going to look like for any individual person, but we do expect for it to be kind of a bumpy road as you see there. And we do expect, while there will be plateaus, there will be days or even weeks sometimes where a person is making some improvement and functioning a little better, we do expect to see that long, slow decline over time. At Alzheimer's San Diego, we don't use any of the numeric staging models for the disease. There are several out there, and they are useful in a medical or in a therapy setting. But we generally just talk about the early stage of the disease when symptoms are mild and a person does not require assistance with personal care tasks. The middle stage of the disease is when the symptoms are more moderate, and the person is beginning to require some assistance with those basic tasks of daily life, bathing, grooming, getting dressed, eating, those types of tasks. We'll talk more about those in a little bit. In the middle stage, a person may not require physical assistance with those things. They may just need some reminders or some kind of prompting. The late stage of the disease, though, is where the individual has quite severe symptoms and they do require assistance with all of those tasks of daily living. Again, it may be that they require very heavy physical assistance, or they may still be fairly able to complete some of those tasks, but require a lot in the way of reminders and sort of safety and supervision. The end stage of the disease, unfortunately, Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia are terminal illnesses. The end stage is really, there's the late stage, which I just described, where the person has some pretty severe symptoms. The end stage are the moments, the days, the sometimes weeks right before death. These are unfortunately terminal illnesses. And that's because there is disease in the person's brain. The brain is the control center of everything that we're doing, both voluntarily and involuntarily. It's controlling all of our bodily functions, as well as our thinking and our memory and all those cognitive functions we talk a lot about when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia. But again, today I'm just focusing on the late stage, the end stage, and what's happening in the brain and the functions that the person would be losing. So a quick look at the basic biology of the brain, the basic regions of it. Alzheimer's and most forms of dementia tend to start in the temporal lobes, in the middle part of our brain, and then spread up into the frontal lobe, move up into the parietal lobe, and eventually reach the back of the brain, the occipital lobe, the cerebellum, and the brain stem. So we're talking about the part of the disease, the late stage, when the symptoms are severe, when there is a fair amount of pathology in both the cerebellum, which is back at the base of the brain, and the brain stem, which is at the top of the spinal column, so the connection between the brain and the spine. So the cerebellum is involved in controlling several key functions. This is where most of our fine motor skill, as well as our major gross muscle control, our ability to control our limbs, our balance are regulated. When there is extensive damage from Alzheimer's or another pathology in the cerebellum, we're likely to see significant speech impairment, if little to no speech at all. When there's damage in the brain stem, this is really the phase of the disease where the brain is going to begin kind of shutting down a lot of these essential bodily functions. Our brain stem is the connection between the brain and all of our vital organs, and so that part of the brain is sending messages to the esophagus about whether to swallow whatever is coming down the esophagus, right? Is it liquid? Is it air? Is it food? Where does it need to go? So difficulty with swallowing is a very common late stage symptom. The brainstem is regulating our body temperature, our general digestion, certainly very involved in our sleep cycles, regulating basic heart and lung function, and of course, keeping us breathing, right? Sending messages to the lungs and the rest of the pulmonary system. So when there is damage in this region of the brain, we do see first a series of changes in how the body is doing all of these things, and eventually a slow shutting down of those symptoms. So I hope that while difficult to hear, I hope that it helps to explain. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia around there being terminal illnesses, about them being fatal in nature. Well, how does a person die from a memory problem? Well, as you can see, the memory problem is a symptom of a pathology that is in the brain. When there's damage in these other regions of the brain, that's where we see difficulty with memory and thinking, reasoning, right? All of those other sort of behavioral and cognitive symptoms. When there's damage in these back deeper regions of the brain, we begin to see the reasons that these diseases are in fact fatal. So as a result of all of those changes, these are the changes we're likely to see in the person, because of course we can't see what's happening in their brain. We see what's happening on the outside, how they're functioning. And in the late stages of the disease, we are likely to observe that a person has very limited and sometimes no verbal communication, as I mentioned before. It's not uncommon for a person in the late stage of Alzheimer's and other types of dementia to really only use a few words or a few sounds. It doesn't happen to everybody. I really want to emphasize everybody's sort of journey and trajectory looks very different, but it would not be unexpected to see very limited verbal communication. That's not to say the person can't communicate, and we'll be talking about that as we go along. It is to be expected and needs to be planned ahead for that the person is going to require 24-hour supervision and assistance with all of those basic activities of daily living, those personal care tasks that I was talking about before. I mentioned difficulty with chewing and swallowing. Again, not a universal symptom, but a very common one. And so something that we want people to be thinking about and planning ahead for. We'll talk more about that in a little bit here. And then finally, yes.
Can I just, I'm not sure if this is the right time to ask this, but
Sure.
this is with regards to communication. If, you know, for a person in the late stage who is still communicating, will you, if not now, then perhaps later, be able to respond to the question about how do you respond to a person in the end stages of dementia who's asking for family members who are themselves deceased?
If I may, can I hold that until we get to the section on communication? It's a wonderful question. Please remind me if I don't remember it, but I'd rather talk about that in the context of other types of communication, but thank you. That's that is actually a not uncommon symptom, and I'm glad that you asked that question for people to talk about things like going on a trip, right? Needing to pack, getting ready for a journey, preparing to see people who are long deceased. It's not uncommon at all for us for those who are verbally communicating, for them to communicate on those types of topics. So I don't, I'm not pushing this off. I just want to sort of answer it in with more context. But it's a wonderful question and sort of a behavior that is not to be feared, right? It is common, and we do see it often in people with dementia and in people without, actually. So yeah, thank you. Sure. So finally, we would expect to see somebody have very limited physical mobility as well. Most people within the late stage of dementia are going to be bedbound or very close to it. That's not uncommon. So all of this is a lot, right? I'll just ask everyone to kind of take a deep breath and feel whatever you're feeling. That I am a longtime dementia educator. I talk about this stuff all day, every day, and it's not academic for me, right? It's these are very personal experiences. All of these things that I'm talking about, these changes, we're talking about individual lives, individual support systems, families who are being affected by these things. It's really important to us that we just acknowledge that grief doesn't just come at the end of this disease. Grief doesn't only happen after we lose someone that we care about. Grief is happening at every stage of the Alzheimer's and dementia journey. It is normal. It should absolutely be expected. It's going to hit you when you least expect it. And there's a wonderful term called ambiguous loss that was crafted by a psychologist named Pauline Boss. Ambiguous loss is the type of loss, the type of grief that we experience when someone is actually physically still there, right? But they're also absent in some key ways. So this happens when a person disappears, when there's a natural disaster, or we lose somebody in war, for example. It happens in severe mental illness, where the person is physically still there, but we're not able to connect with them the way that we used to. This happens in dementia as well, right? The person is still physically with us, but we are losing parts. We're losing our shared history together. We're losing our normal ways of communicating. This is grief. It's an ambiguous and weird kind of grief, but it's real, and we want you to be aware that it is to be expected. It will catch you off guard. Other people in your life who aren't familiar with the ins and outs of caring for someone, loving someone with dementia, may not understand it and recognize it as a legitimate form of grief, right? Well, he's still there. You still have him, but it's real. So grief can present in lots of different ways. People feel it differently. Sometimes it produces sadness. Sometimes it's real physical anguish. Sometimes it's physical pain, right? All different ways that this type of distress that we feel can manifest itself, including illness. Many people who are caring for someone in this difficult journey, all these ups and downs, and the constant changing, and the ambiguous loss, and the grief, this does produce health consequences in a lot of care partners. We really want you to be attuned to those needs in yourself. We'll talk at the end about resources for managing grief. So aside from the one question that I'm going to hold off until we get into the communication section, are there any other questions, Jean, that I can handle at this time?
I'm just having a look here. I think a couple of these can also wait for when you're covering in more detail the communication end of things.
Okay.
Yes, so these ones can all be covered at that time.
Okay, great. Then I'll ask you to keep them organized and lay them on me when the time is.
Okay, sounds good.
So now we are going to talk about strategies for connecting and communicating when our normal means of verbal communication are becoming challenging. I also just have to sort of acknowledge we are talking primarily about face-to-face interactions, and I understand not all of you are physically present with the person that you care for. So I will be trying to talk about, and I'll ask you to be thinking about ways you can adapt this to connecting with someone by telephone, connecting via video conferencing, right? Other types of communication that are available to us now. So I want to just kind of take a step back and point out that while all I've talked about so far are the losses that the person will experience, and they are real, there's a lot that remains, even in the very late stages of this disease, and it's important for us all to keep that in mind too. Most people in the late stage of dementia they are aware to some extent. They've got a sense of their general environment. They can respond to sounds, visuals, people's vocal tone, the emotion that people are conveying. They have a general sense of I'm in a safe place. I'm in a place where these people, even if I can't recognize them in this moment, they care about me and I can trust them. Or conversely, if a person doesn't feel safe, right, there is an awareness of the environment. Most people in the late stages of dementia with those severe symptoms are still going to have a very strong connection and an ability to respond to nonverbal sensory stimulation. Happily, humans have many ways of taking in and responding to sensory information that go far beyond our language and our verbal abilities. So a short little exercise for you. If you don't already have your chat box open, I'll ask you to open that up. And in the chat, tell me what you see here. Looking at this picture of this person, what could you say that might be true about him? What are some things you could gather about where he lives, what he likes to do, activities that stimulate him, things that make him feel good? What are some things you could guess about this person? Go ahead and write it in the chat. And Jean, can I just have you kind of read a couple of these things?
You sure can. Let's see. He looks happy. He's a happy-go-lucky gentleman enjoying his garden. Happy, enjoying nature. Lots of happies.
Mm-hmm.
And he likes gardening. Gardening and sunshine makes him happy. So it's all, everybody's saying all these things. He loves gardening.
Oh, he likes the sun, I see. I like that.
Flowers. Yeah.
I would say too, something I observe about this image, this is a very kind of snappy looking person, right? He's nicely groomed. He's got a nice pressed shirt. Even though he's gardening, he wore a nice shirt instead of what I'd be wearing out in the garden. He's in a he's got a nice watch on, right? This is somebody who maybe takes care of he looks healthy, right? Takes care of himself, looks alert. Yeah.
A couple of folks have said yes, well groomed, and he can handle a cutter.
Right.
You know?
Right. More than I can do. Yeah. Great. That's thank you for indulging me in that. What I want to just sort of observe about that, the reason we do that activity is, I mean, none of us know anything about that person. This is just a stock photo that I found of someone who made me feel happy when I looked at that image. We don't know anything about this person, but we can see that there's a lot that he, based on this still image, there's some things about his preferences, maybe values, things he likes to do that we can just look at the outset and guess. So what I'd like you to do, I'm gonna get my clicker to work. Think about the person that you care for, or if you care for more than one person, just consider one of them for a moment. And here's what I'll ask you to take out that paper and pencil for a moment and just reflect on that person. What are their unique qualities, characteristics, the things they love, the things they've always enjoyed, their preferences, things in their personal history that you know about them? Right? Do they love to garden? Do they have a favorite movie that always makes them smile when it comes on TV? Do they have a particular type of music that they really enjoy? Right? Not even knowing this person, we were able to come up with a couple things about this guy. So write down for yourself some things that you know to be true about your person. And we'll come back to this list here in a moment, or to your reflections. You don't need to share them with us. This is for private reflection about the person that you care for. At every stage of the disease, right, we retain parts of ourselves, we retain some type of abilities or changed abilities, right? Maybe this person used to be a master pruner, and now, right, while he can still handle those clippers, right, maybe that actually represents a significant change from something that he used to be able to do. We don't know. But there are always remaining strengths and skills and abilities, and it's important that we see those as well as seeing all of the loss and the changes in function that a person is experiencing. So now I will ask you to think further about the person, look back at that list that you just wrote down, or consider it if you didn't write it down, and think about ways that you might be able to connect with this person through the other senses, right? Besides being able to talk with them, right? Think the sense of touch. Do they love pets? Do they love the feel of a certain fabric? feel free if you want to drop, if any ideas are coming in to you, if any ideas are coming to you, feel free to write them in the chat and share ways that you could connect with your person using the other senses. The sense of sight, again, like a movie or a window that's easy for them to get to, where there's an interesting view, a drive that you could take to a particular location that they might enjoy seeing or visiting. The sense of smell, very, very important. Are there smells that they enjoy, things that might trigger a nice emotional memory? And I want to just say, when I talk about triggering emotional memories, I am not suggesting that we should be trying to get the person to recall a particular incident or moment or bit of their history. We just want to connect them to a moment, right? Does smelling baking cookies remind them of their childhood, or the smell of a favorite old soup on the stove remind them of, you know, their grandmother? I don't know. Lavender, mint, right? There's lots of smells that are pleasant for a variety of reasons to a lot of people. The sense of taste, of course, this gets tricky when a person is experiencing swallowing difficulty, but are there ways that you can connect with them through food? Food is such an important way that humans connect and show love and care for each other. Are there some favorite foods that you've enjoyed together that you could bring in or integrate or have sent to them to let them enjoy? Again, those positive triggers. And then, of course, sound. As with smell, we have very strong sense memories of sound and rhythm. A lot of people enjoy the sound of trickling water, a brook, the sound of bird song, and of course, music. Incredibly impactful and important way of connecting with someone. If you know music that they enjoyed in their young adulthood, I'll tell you, there's lots of research that shows us this is when we form our strongest sort of emotional connection to the music of memory and rhythm. So poetry, songs, music that the person enjoyed as a young adult in their late 20s, early 30s. If you know that, or if you have a means to find out what particular pieces they've enjoyed, this will be a wonderful activity and way of connecting with someone. Oops, sorry, thank you for all of these beautiful suggestions that are coming in the chat. I know I'm trying not to look at it. I'm trying to leave it to Jean, but I just can't resist. Ooh, watching cooking shows, that's a great idea. Okay, so a couple of things to keep in mind. Please keep your ideas flowing. You're welcome to keep sharing as long as you'd like to. People that are living in the late stage of dementia can absolutely experience happiness, joy. They may not be able to sort of banter with you or play along in the joke, but certainly if you laugh at something, if you know that something is funny, they may very well know that it's funny too. It can still respond to humor and laughter and joy when it's around them. So it's really important that we not just stay focused on all the bad stuff, all the negative aspects of this disease, but remember how much capacity for sort of fun and enjoyment and laughter the person may still be able to have. And to the point that I was making before when we were talking about those sensory experiences, the point of that in bringing those sensory experiences to the person is not to create new memories. You'll hold on to those memories. And I hope that they'll be happy memories. But for the person with late stage dementia, that's not our expectation. Our hope is that we're creating a nice moment for them, right? Rather than a memory. So I want to talk now a little bit about communication strategies. I'll pause and just say that next week we have a full webinar on the topic of communication specifically. It'll be on July 16th, whatever day of the week that is, next week. So I'll refer you to that if you'd like to really dive in on this more, but we'll talk about some kind of key strategies that might work with folks in the late stage of dementia. Of course, slowing down our speech, speaking as clearly and as simple as we can, right? Not using long, complicated sentences, not jumping from topic to topic, but staying very focused, keeping it very warm and direct, but really as few words as possible is actually usually better. Give the person lots of time to respond, recognizing that they may not be able to respond verbally, but maybe you'll see some other nonverbal way of them letting you know, I heard what you said, right? A smile, a grimace, a squeeze of your hand, a gesture of some kind. But remember that their brain needs a lot more time than it used to, even in the early and middle stages of the disease. The late stage, there is extensive damage, and they will need a lot more time to respond in that normal sort of back and forth flow of a conversation that we're used to. There's just going to be a lot more quiet and a lot more pauses. Think back to those sensory exercises that were activities that you jotted down and thought about that might work with your person. And think about ways that you might be able to use some kind of physical prompts, if you will, to guide your conversations and your interactions, right? Photographs, pictures, images, food, music, right? Putting on a piece of music and talking about it can be a very powerful way to initiate a conversation. Do be mindful of your physical approach to the person if you are face-to-face with them. In all likelihood, they will be lying down or seated if they're living in the late stage of dementia when you make your physical approach to them. Just be aware they've probably got a significantly narrowed peripheral field of vision, not being able to see much further than maybe a couple of inches if they're in the very late stages of the disease, outside of where they're looking directly. That's a very common symptom in the late stage of the disease. So do be mindful when you're approaching somebody from the side, that can be startling and frightening to them, right? So instead, make a physical approach from the front, but pause, right? Let them sort of adjust and become aware that you are about to enter their physical space before you just come on in and pull up a chair, or come in and bring your homemade chocolate chip cookies and offer them one. Right, just be mindful of sort of a softer and slower physical approach, which will often sort of start your interaction off in a more positive way. And again, be watching for those nonverbal behavioral expressions. They are a form of communication, right? Good or bad. If a person is smiling, grimacing, if they're swatting at you or spitting or, kicking, or, a person who is expressing agitation, combativeness, they are attempting to tell you something. I'm uncomfortable, I need something from you, you're not understanding what it is that I need. So I'll leave it there for now, but please know that our communication skills class does go into those sort of triggers and what different types of communication might mean in a little more detail. So I want to pause here and go back to that great question, Jean, that you asked me a moment ago. Can you reread it or summarize it for me?
Sure. Well, we've had a few folks chime in very similar.
Okay.
Where the person that's living with dementia in the late stages is asking about family members who are deceased. So saying, where are they? Or I want to see him or her. How do you respond to those types of questions?
Great. Thank you. So this is actually a topic that we cover extensively in our communication class, but I do want to address it. What I would suggest here is a technique that we call validation. Right? And again, we explore that in more detail in other classes. But what I mean when I say validating the person is responding to not the words that the person is saying, not getting caught up in the facts or the correctness of what they have said, but instead responding to the feeling, the emotion that they are conveying. So a person who is at the end of their life or nearing the end of their life and is asking about a deceased parent or a long deceased spouse, for example, right? This is probably a person who is experiencing some sort of end of life reflection, right? Thinking back, remembering, experiencing emotions related to childhood, younger adulthood, right? Sort of that life review that most of us are going to engage in later and at the end of our life. If we're lucky, we get to engage in what's called life review. A person with dementia who's experiencing confusion, disorientation, right? Reminding that person in that moment that that person is dead, that that person is gone, that they're not going to see them again. This is an exercise in futility, probably frustration for both of you. And even if you're successful at reminding this person, gosh, she's been gone for 20 years, right? The end result is not a good one, right? You're just encouraging that person to relive that grief and that loss. So the technique of validation is a way of saying to the person, whatever you're feeling, whatever you're experiencing is totally okay. It's valid, right? So if I'm asking about my long deceased mother and I'm living in late stage dementia, something that you could say to me that would be more validating than trying to remind me that she's not here anymore, right? And that I'm not going to see her, is engaging me in a conversation about her. Your mother was so beautiful, right? If you knew this person, you can bring up a memory, you can talk about why they're so special. I know you really miss them, right? If you didn't know that person, there may be an opportunity, depending upon where they are in the disease process, to just engage them in some questions or remembering that person. But whatever is appropriate for that person in that particular interaction, what you want to focus on is their feeling of connection to that person, right? They may be at the end of their life sort of preparing for this transition, this journey, and therefore they may be thinking about all of the people in their life who have been important. Let's not cut that off, right? Let's let them think about that person. And if they're wondering when they're going to see them or where they are, right? Providing reassurances like you're going to see them very soon. Right. It's hard for me to guess what specific words might work with any individual person, but that's the general concept. We want to provide the person with reassurance, comfort, and let them know whatever their thinking is going on, whatever their perception of things, right? Whether or not that person is still alive, where they might be, it's not wrong. And if it is wrong, it doesn't matter that it's wrong, right? That's what we mean by validation. So finding some way to connect to what they're feeling rather than what they're saying.
So then, Amy, how would we kind of apply this strategy of validation to a person in the late stage of dementia who is hallucinating, seeing things that aren't there?
Yeah, similarly, another really good question. Similarly, I think it's really important just to acknowledge it. First, pay attention to how they're responding to that thing they're seeing or hearing. Sometimes hallucinations are auditory or people smell things that aren't there. Pay attention to their response to it. If it's something that makes them happy, sometimes people are hallucinating seeing people that they're happy to see. Go with it, right? Who cares? They're having a good hallucination. They're feeling good about seeing those people. Great, right? More validation. But validation is important too, even if it's a negative experience. If they're seeing or hearing something that is scaring them, letting them know, I see that you're scared. I'm here for you, right? Oof, that must be a really scary feeling, right? Because you can't see it. If it's a true hallucination, you aren't able to sort of see what it is that they're seeing or hear what they're seeing. So there are limits to how you can respond to that. But if what you can see is whatever they see or hear, it frightens them or it makes them uncomfortable, just acknowledge it. Right? Gosh, that must be really scary, but don't worry, I'm here. We're going to get it taken care of, right? Finding some way to communicate to the person that what they're seeing and hearing, they're not, not trying to convince them that it's not there. That's not helpful, right? If I think that I see somebody walking into this room right now, no amount of your reassurance that they're not really there is going to help me. I see that person right there, right? What you need to do is help me feel better about the fact that the person is there. So that's what we mean by validation. That helps.
So another question that has come up here about communication that is, I think, really good one during these times of sheltering in place is asking about suggestions for enhancing communication when you are not able to physically be with the person with memory loss because of the pandemic that's going on.
Techniques for enhancing communication?
Yeah, so when only contact can be through phone or video conferencing,
Right.
so is there kind of one would maybe be better than the other? And just kind of any thoughts or suggestions for
Yeah.
making communication.
There's a range. It depends where they are. It depends what their experience and comfort with technology is. Just about everybody has used telephones in their life. And so that is a familiar sort of physical experience. And, you know, the voice coming through the telephone, that's familiar to most people, even in the late stages of the disease. And so for a lot of people, being on the phone, watching a movie together at the same time, right? That's being televised, that's being broadcast, not streaming, right? So you're actually watching it together and being on the phone, for example. There are ways you can sort of incorporate stimulation as well as that, that communication at the same time. Sending a magazine or photographs to them and then being on the phone. You'll need someone to help you on the other end, probably, right? Depending upon, are they at home? Do they have some in-home support? Do they live in a care facility? Can you get the care facility staff, the community staff to help you facilitate this conversation? But a lot of good connection and communication by phone is totally possible. With regards to video conferencing, right, using FaceTime or Google or even Zoom to facilitate visits, it's working really well for a lot of families right now who are isolated because of the coronavirus, you know, not being able to get in and make in-person visits the way that they used to. But it does generally require a fair amount of help on the person with dementia's side, right? You can't just set them up with an iPad and hope they figure it out. You're going to have staff or a volunteer, somebody there with them who's safe to interact with them, right? Who can facilitate that. It doesn't work for everyone. For a lot of people, participating in video conferencing is just really confusing. If that's, you know, talking to someone through a screen is I'm telling you right now, it's a really weird thing to do. And it doesn't really track with everybody. So I'm all in favor of giving it a try, seeing if that's a nice way to communicate, if it makes sense to them, and if it's logistically feasible. But if not, there's nothing wrong with relying on the telephone or even, you know, writing letters that somebody can physically hold on to and have somebody read to them. That works too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful questions. I'm going to move on to some caregiving topics, but we are going to pause again for more questions. So I'll be happy to address anything else that's coming in. Great, sir. Wonderful questions. So let's talk a little bit about providing comfort and personal care to folks who are at the end of their life. First, remembering, as I mentioned before, that communication is a way, or excuse me, behavior is a way of communicating something, right? The person may not be doing so consciously or totally intentionally, but by telling you that, you know, I see a person over there in the corner who's looking at me in kind of a scary way, right? I'm communicating something to you. I'm feeling unsettled. I'm feeling like I don't know where I am. I'm not sure I can trust the people around me, right? It all means something. So the onus is on us as care partners to do what we can to try to figure out what unmet need does this person have that I might be able to identify and meet. Don't overlook the importance of the most basic stuff. Is this person hungry? Are they thirsty? Do they need to use the bathroom? We never want to assume at any stage of the disease, but especially in the late stages of the disease. Well, I put down the glass of water next to her. She's not choosing to drink it, so she must not be thirsty. Right? Remember all of that extensive damage that's happened throughout the disease process. Up in the parietal lobe, the person may be able to see the glass of water and be completely unable to recognize what that is, what it's for, right? Or to physically be able to grasp it with enough grip strength and get it into their mouth, right? So don't overlook the importance of assessing for those basic needs first. Start there. Then ask, might this person have some pain, some discomfort? Has it been a while since they've moved around? Even people who are bedbound need to move around. Movement is essential for our physical comfort. So if a person was inclined to have headaches, or they had arthritic pain or sciatica, right? Some kind of pain that they had earlier in their life, I assure you they still have it, right? What they've lost is the ability to tell you, this hurts, get me an Advil, or ow, my sciatica is really acting up. I need to get up and move around a little bit. Right? Is the person experiencing restlessness, fatigue, or just any other kind of response to a disturbed sleep and wake cycle? It is very normal for people in the late stages of the disease to experience significant sleep disruption. That usually means lots more sleeping, sleeping a lot more during the day as well as sleeping at night, but it could be what we call day-night reversal, where a person is becoming more wakeful at night. Their body's not responding to the norm. It doesn't have the same kind of circadian rhythm, because remember, there's damage in that that base of the brain that's regulating that. So not responding to normal things, sunlight and darkness, the way that they used to. Is the person just plain bored, understimulated, feeling socially isolated? We cannot overlook or underestimate the importance of the need for social stimulation, especially in the late stages of the disease. And it's very easy for people to overlook this. Well, she doesn't seem to enjoy reading. She can't read anymore. She can't follow the story of her favorite movies or television programs. So we just kind of let the person sit there not doing too much during the day, right? It is really on us as care partners or as professionals who are caring for people with dementia within residential settings to find ways of bringing continuous social engagement and interaction or intellectual cognitive stimulation to people, even in the very late stages of the disease. Our social workers at Alzheimer's San Diego can give you ideas and suggestions for, there's really neat free streaming programming that's now available. You can watch it on televisions, you can watch it on tablets, very short programs with very sort of limited plot, limited dialogue that needs to be followed. There's lots of neat stuff out there that can keep a person from feeling bored or restless, even if they're not able to sort of follow along or participate in activities the way that they used to. And then finally, personal comfort, right? Just this is another area where it's so helpful to really intimately know this person. I know you don't always have that history with them. You don't always have access to this information, but knowing things like, they really hate itchy wool blankets, or they really love a big wool sweater. Do they like socks when they sleep? Do they like to have a fan blowing or a window open to have some fresh air and breeze? What are the things that make this person feel safe, that make this person feel comfortable? Often what they're communicating to us through, verbal expression or through behavior is just something very basic, like, I really hate sleeping in socks, get these things off my feet. Right. So in addressing those needs, remember behavior is usually a nonverbal form of expression. So keep an eye out for all of the things. There's what the person is saying if they are speaking, but there's all the other things that they are doing and expressing through facial movement, through bodily movement, through repetitive movement, right? Someone who's tugging at their blanket or tugging at their clothing. That's not coming from nowhere, right? It usually means I'm uncomfortable in some way. Don't rely on the person to tell you or to show you what they need. They may not be able to do that. So we really have to insert ourselves in a lot of ways, thinking about when was the last time this person went to the restroom, had a bowel movement, took a sip of that water that's been sitting at their bedside for a long time. We don't want to assume that they're going to identify those needs when they feel them. Watch for very sudden changes in the person's behavior or a very sudden drop in the person's status, their functional status. If they were able to talk pretty conversationally today and you go visit tomorrow and they can't, that is not a normal progression of the disease. That normally means something medical is going on, right? Do they have an infection? Are they coming down sick? Or they may be experiencing some kind of pain, having a mental health issue. It usually means something medical is going on with them. So don't assume that, remember that graph that I showed you, it's that long, slow decline over time. There's not usually a very steep decline, a drop off in function like that in the absence of some kind of a medical condition. So, and it's very easy for me to say, and it seems obvious, but it's still worth emphasizing. You can't do this alone. You have to have help. If you are doing it alone, you need backup, right? You need a plan for a time that you are unable to respond to that. Excuse me, unable to respond to that person's need. They need a safety net. Well, you need a safety net as well. We'll be talking about resources for that as we go along. Excuse me. Excuse me. When we talk about providing personal care, just a little visual of what it is that I'm talking about. These are considered the 6, excuse me, the 6 basic activities of daily living, ADLs. That should probably be familiar terminology to some of you. That is what assisted living and memory care communities use to sort of gauge how much assistance does a person require. It's what Medicare and other types of health insurance use to gauge how much assistance a person needs. And it's a key concept in long-term care insurance and long-term care services as well. There's like healthcare, all of the stuff that is provided to help us with our medical needs. This is all the everything else. We call this long-term care assistance with the ADLs, eating, bathing or showering, or just getting cleaned up, right? Sometimes bathing is happening in a bed, getting dressed. We're talking here about being able to do these things for oneself. Transferring refers to the movement from a lying to seated or a seated to standing position. You see the image there on the screen. Assistance with toileting, again, depending on the person and their level of functioning. This could mean any number of things. It could mean being able to ambulate, getting oneself to the bathroom, to the toilet in order to toilet independently, or it could mean a person could be incontinent, but still managing that incontinence on their own, right? Changing their undergarments regularly. So being able to meet one's own toileting needs, walking, moving around, this is often referred to as ambulation, right? And it can happen with or without assistance. So when we talk about helping people in the late stage with their personal care tasks, the ADLs are usually what we're talking about. It's the basic essential stuff of life, of course, but it is not considered healthcare in the traditional sense. movement is a really important part of caring for somebody in the late stages of the disease. So it's important that, you know, we are prepared to meet those physical ADL needs, but it is equally important that we are prepared to keep this person sort of moving as much as possible. For a lot of caregivers, this is actually the hardest part of providing care to a person in the late stages of dementia. But moving is essential for humans are not meant to sit still for long periods of time. It's essential for comfort and well-being. We need to keep the person, even if we can't like get them outside walking, that may no longer be possible. Get them to be changing their positions in the room or in the home or in the piece of furniture that they're sitting in. Having them change positions and moving around as frequently as possible. Changing it up if they're sitting, standing, lying down. Even simple movement like that, simple is not quite the right word that I'm looking for there, but just relocating on a regular basis is really important. Also very important to be realistic about how much movement, how much motion, how much physical activity is really possible. Of course, we'd love for every person to be out in their garden like that gentleman up until the very last days of their life if they love to garden, but we have to be realistic about what's physically possible for that person. So we want to be adapting to the changes, the loss of function that the person is experiencing, but kind of maximizing what they still have. If a person is bedbound, and again, as I mentioned, it's not uncommon that the person has just very little ability to control their limbs and get up and walk around safely. So many people will end up bedbound. We still got to keep them moving. Repositioning every 2 hours or so is usually the standard. We don't want, when we're sound asleep, we're usually still moving around plenty. Right, because our brain is still pretty active when we're sleeping. But a person with dementia, when they're sleeping, they're not likely to be doing lots of that tossing and turning. So somebody else needs to be in charge of keeping them moving around, even if they're staying in bed every couple of hours. This is a lot of work. Just want to sort of pause and say, I know that. And again, this is why you can't be doing this by yourself 24/7, right? You need assistance. The reason that movement and repositioning is so important for people who are bedbound or who use wheelchairs and don't stand too often is skin breakdown, right? We need good circulation, and the skin is thinner. There's less muscle, there's less fat, and especially in the bony areas, the buttocks, the tailbone, the backs of the heels, those bony areas that are pressing up against the person's chair or the bedding, those areas are very prone to skin breakdown, and we can see the formation of pressure ulcers, bed sores, those types of things, if we're not keeping the person moving often enough. So when we think about all of those multi-sensory ways of connecting and communicating that we were thinking about before, think about ways that you can incorporate movement, motion, physical activity into those things, right? Getting out into the garden to bend down and smell a flower, moving around a little bit to that favorite piece of music, whatever, playing along, doing the motions along with a movie or a television show that you're watching, right? There's lots of ways that we can incorporate physical movement into our multi-sensory activities with the person. Most people can't do this without some outside help, as you can imagine, and that can come in the form of people, but it can also just come in the form of stuff, in the form of equipment. Adaptive supplies are sometimes referred to as durable medical equipment, DME, and much of these pieces of equipment, these supplies, a lot of DME can be ordered by a physician and covered by Medicare or other forms of insurance. So every reason to talk with a doctor or a physical therapist about procuring a prescription in order for some of these supplies and see if they can be covered. I'm going to be talking about hospice in a little bit. Hospice is one way that a lot of people are able to procure a lot of these adaptive supplies that you see listed here. Gait belts are little canvas, very simple little, when we teach these classes in person, I can physically have one and show it to you, and I can't do that right now. It's making me crazy. They go around the person's waist. It's a very simple, costs just a couple of dollars, and allows you to have something to hold on to when you're helping with those mobility, walking with somebody, keeping them steady on their feet, or helping with transferring from lying to seated or seated to standing. It just gives you a little something to hold on to around, instead of grabbing their clothes or grabbing their arm or their wrist. You've got this gait belt that gives you some more stability when you're trying to provide that assistance. In terms of the furniture, right? Think about recliners, lift chairs are sort of a mixed bag in terms of their effectiveness with people with dementia. If a person in the late stage of dementia has not used an automatic, has not used a recliner or an automatic chair that would lift them up, that's going to be pretty frightening and scary to them in all likelihood. So maybe not something to introduce new at the late stage of the disease, but it can be very helpful if it's incorporated earlier in the disease process so they can get used to it. In the bathroom, lots of durable medical equipment that can help. Shower chairs, the kind that go over the edge of the tub so the person can slide in, can be particularly helpful to you, the care partner, in preventing back injuries and shoulder injuries. We can raise up toilet seats. We can get bedside commodes. Using things like bedside commodes, walkers, right? All of these sort of mobility tools, because of the damage in the person's brain that happens starting in the middle stages of the disease, it can be very hard for people to learn how to use new pieces of equipment when they already have the brain changes of dementia. So we have to be judicious in how we try to incorporate new adaptive supplies into the home, and just be aware that the person may not be able to start using a new piece of equipment later in the disease process. Mattresses can really help in terms of comfort, but also in terms of preventing that skin breakdown that I was talking about. So there's lots of cool options out there now. Foam, air mattresses, water and gel surfaces that help alleviate or sort of spread out a lot of the pressure on the person's skin or those bony areas. So again, talk to your physician, your hospice provider, or a home health provider. Ask for that home health referral if you are interested in getting Medicare to cover some of these things, but most of these things can also be purchased out of pocket at a basic medical supply store. We've got resources for all of those things our social workers can connect you to if you need them. So Jean, I will pause here and see if there are any questions I can cover.
There are. We've got a few questions here. So a couple of questions regarding how the late stage might affect bladder incontinence, the pattern of it, and are there is it more UTIs likely to happen in the late stage?
Yes, absolutely. Control of one's bladder is problematic for a lot of people in the late stage of the disease. We're very likely to see urinary incontinence. And also a combination factor is that urinary tract infections do tend to become more common in people with dementia as well, for a variety of reasons. It's harder for them to stay well hydrated, but also because of the personal hygiene challenge, right? Staying appropriately clean, right, in order to prevent the infections. So urinary tract infections are, remember when I was speaking about that sudden loss of function that a person might experience related to a medical condition? A urinary tract infection should be sort of top of mind, one of the first things that we're thinking about when we see a sudden change in somebody's status, because they're very, very common in people with dementia. But even people that don't have a UTI, can certainly experience urinary incontinence. Most people will in the late stage of the disease. Losing control of one's bladder is very, very common in late stage dementia. Yeah.
So in a related vein then, with regards to personal hygiene and bathing, for a person that's in the late stage that either may refuse to bathe or that is just difficult physically for a care partner to bathe, what would be some suggestions for good hygiene and cleanliness?
Yeah, well, first I'll just say it's important that we remain flexible about this stuff, right? And let go of perfectionism and expectations regarding cleanliness and personal hygiene. We've got to keep the person basically clean and safe to prevent, skin breakdown and infections. But does the person need to take a shower or bath every day? Absolutely not. Especially in the late stages of the disease, people have very limited movement and physical activity. They're not likely to be getting very sweaty, moving around a lot during the day. So if a couple of times a week we can get them into the bath, that's a huge success. If we can't, and sometimes we can't because they refuse to go, or you as the care partner physically cannot do it. At those medical supply stores that I was describing before, there's now a really nice array of supplies for bed bathing. It's not ideal. It's certainly not a substitute for a good old-fashioned dousing in the shower, but it will do in a pinch. It will keep the skin basically clean. There are dry shampoos. You can simply do, all you got to do is sort of get the person's head up from the pillow a little bit, right? To do a dry shampoo, put them in a shower cap for a few minutes, and then just let it dry. So bed bathing is a good option for a lot of people, but I guess I would say if you're in a situation where for an extended period of time, you as a care partner are unable to meet the person's basic sort of bathing and personal hygiene needs, then this is an indication that you need some more support, right? Yeah. Either bringing in some in-home help or considering placement in a residential care setting. There's lots of room for flexibility. We don't have to be perfect about this, but if you can't meet the person's needs, and it's not a failure on your part, if you can't, these needs are significant, right? Then that's an indication that it's time to reach out for some more support.
I have a suggestion from Great. One of our attendees with regards to oral care that I think is terrific. I'd like to just share.
Great.
This attendee recommends using a water pick that you can take right then to, for example, the bedside, and then, just use a little bowl for them to spit the water into. So that can be used, to kind of get some oral hygiene happening, and yes, keep the mouth moist as well, yes. too.
That's a really great suggestion, and it's important that we not overlook the importance of oral hygiene for the person's overall health, but it also just, for a lot of folks, it feels good. It's actually the water pick it seems like it would be agitating, but for a lot of people, that massage of the gum and the moisture feels really good, and it's very comforting.
Yes. And then we do have a couple of questions here about people either refusing to take medications in the late stage and or having trouble swallowing, having trouble taking the medications.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first I'd refer you right to the pharmacist. Have a conversation with a pharmacist about the specific challenge. Is it about the pill? Is it about the swallowing? Are there some alternatives? First, making sure that medication is still needed, right? We don't want to be asking a person in the late stages of dementia to be taking medication if it's challenging for them, if it's not essential, if it's not really helping them. So talking with the doctor and the pharmacist about whether or not these medications are still needed would be the first step. But then talking about, are there changes in the way it is administered that we could make? Could we crush it? Is it something that could be compounded, meaning having it turned into a liquid? For a lot of people, an individual may function much better at a certain time of day. So is there a way that we could change the time of day that this is administered? There's there's always, some things can be administered transdermally in a patch. So I'd say the pharmacist would be my first stop for that question.
So, and I think we've got a couple of comments here, and I think I would just add that, you know, you really do need to talk to the pharmacist if you're thinking about crushing pills, because not all medications should be crushed.
Yes, or even cut for that matter. That's absolutely right. I would say talk to the pharmacist about whether or not some adaptation of the administration can be done safely. You don't want to assume you could cut or crush any kind of pill. Yeah, but for a lot of people, even if you're not crushing or cutting the pill, just getting it into some kind of a matrix, right? Pudding or applesauce or yogurt, because that substance is easier for them to swallow, it'll get the pill down. That's often an easy sort of workaround.
We had some suggestions along those lines.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, if I may, I'm going to keep us going, and I'm keeping an eye on the time here. I know we may not get to every question. We will certainly do our best, but it's certainly important that we continue talking about, you know, the end of life, the transition to the end of life. So I will keep us going. And if there are more questions, I just want to reassure you, we're here. Our social workers are available to answer questions. I'm going to give you contact information. In fact, a way to reach our social workers directly at the end of the program, or to request contact from a social worker directly. So rest assured, if we don't get to your question today, we are here to answer it one way or another. So let's talk now about what the end of life may look like. Again, as with the disease progression, every person is different. And so the end of life, frankly, a person with late stage dementia, the transition to death doesn't look all that much different, right, than many other long-term chronic illnesses. But we still want to sort of prepare you for the range of things that you may experience. Very likely to see very little wakefulness, a lot of sleeping, more difficulty with swallowing, as we have noted, but generally just eating and drinking less. This happens to everybody as the body is preparing to kind of shut down. We don't need as much of that fuel and hydration. Less communication or changed communication is very common. And as I indicated in response to that wonderful question about asking after deceased loved ones, it's not uncommon for us to hear people talking about preparing to go somewhere, or preparing to see certain people, or asking after certain people. So we may just see some communication that is new. It'll take you back a little bit, but it is not to be, it shouldn't surprise or shock. And then just a physical symptom that is really common in dementia in particular is what we call contracture. Very common that the person, see, this hand is probably easier for you to see, that the person kind of looks like they're making a fist, a contracture of the digits, right? They're not always really very tense, but you want to kind of keep an eye on it and see what you can do to just keep their fingers comfortable, because contracture can sometimes cause a little bit of cramping or discomfort. It's not uncommon. It's nothing to worry about, but do what you can. Maybe little hand massages, lotion to sort of soften that up, ease that up, but also to keep the skin clean and healthy under there if you can, to prevent infection. It's really more of a comfort issue than a safety or health issue. So that's the transition, what's going to actually happen at the end of life. Again, every person's going to experience this a bit differently, but when the person will stop eating and drinking, there will be minimal to no responsiveness to outside stimulation. Very common. People just kind of appear to be turning inward. Excuse me. Cold because of changes in the person's circulation. Cold hands and feet, very common. Changes in the skin, coloring. We will often see discoloration. People look pale. Sometimes people will become flushed. But most common, what we actually see is something called mottling, little patches, or red or purple looking patches. That's just, you know, blood sort of circulating in slower and different ways throughout the body. And then changes in breathing are very likely to happen. We may see a shallowing of the breath. So they may actually begin to breathe a little faster, but less deeply. And then eventually, right, of course, the breathing ceases. After a death, you're not going to do this perfectly. You have so much to think about, and we're going to talk about planning ahead for this here next. But ultimately, your goal is to have thought through what needs to happen in advance, so that you don't have to be thinking clearly in these moments, right? If the person has given instructions about brain donation, other organ donations, there may be some things that have to happen like right away, depending upon the type of organ that's going to be donated. In the absence of that, right, you have time to sit quietly, take a deep breath, spend time with the person. There is nothing wrong or unhygienic or dangerous about spending time with a person who is deceased, right? You can take your time in doing these things. We just want you to be aware of, you know, what some of those steps might be. We actually have a very helpful checklist that our social workers can send to you if you're interested in this, if you want to sort of have it on hand. But so there's the donation of organs, or the disposition of remains. If there's something specific that needs to be done, that again does usually need to happen fairly quickly. You want to think about who needs to be contacted, the key family, friends, and supports, not just for that person, but your own as well, right? If there are people in your life that you're going to need some support from in these hours and days ahead, reach out to them when you feel ready. Eventually, you'll need to notify, the person's attorney, right? The bank accounts, insurance providers, the Social Security office, right? Their insurance companies, all of those things. But you need to get the death certificate first before you can do this. Just keep in mind, there is going to be a lot of follow-up that's necessary, but a lot of people, their impulse is just to jump in and start doing all this right away because they want to be busy, they want something to do, right? But these things don't generally have to happen immediately. So collect those important documents, right? Ideally, we've done all of this well in advance, and I'll make a little plug for our legal and financial basics class, which is coming up later this month. We can help you think and get organized ahead of time for some of these things. But above all else, give yourself time to grieve. Think about the rituals that are going to be comforting and helpful to you and the other people who loved and cared about this person. And again, please remember that the person's body does not need to be removed immediately. If the person lives in a residential care facility, talk with the staff about what their requirements are there. But there's usually some room for some flexibility. So now let's talk about some resources for making all of that happen as smoothly as possible. The end of life, as I've been alluding to, there are a lot of difficult questions to be answered, right? Are we gonna wanna do CPR if this person's heart stops? When severe swallowing problems, if those were to occur in the late stage of the dementia, how do we as care partners, representatives, how do we feel about the insertion of feeding tubes, the use of artificial nutrition or intravenous or artificial hydration, right? How we feel about it is one thing, how they feel about it is far more important. So it's really important that if we can, if it's not too late, we start engaging in conversations with the person with the diagnosis now. Right? Find out how they feel about these things. Make sure that you've got their wishes documented, that it's clear, and of course that you have the authority that you need to do these things. There's also, in addition to things like breathing tubes and CPR and artificial nutrition and hydration. There's also the lesser non-heroic measures we have to think about. Simple things like if they develop pneumonia, would we want to use antibiotics to treat that pneumonia, or do we want to let it run its course? How would this person feel about dying in the hospital? Most people would prefer not to, but it's not always possible. But should we be sort of trying really hard to keep them out of the hospital? If so, that's going to take a little extra work. So just an important thing to be thinking about. A couple of care planning resources. Again, I want to recommend to you our legal and financial basics class that will be offered on July 21st, if I'm not mistaken, where we'll go into these documents. We have an attorney that will be presenting that program in much more detail. But for your basic reference, there are a couple good resources for having discussions about these things, either with the person with dementia or with their representative. Prepareforyourcare.org has a lot of great sort of conversation starters, as well as a neat company called Go Wish, who sells these. It's like a little card game that you can play to facilitate a conversation about what your wishes and preferences are at the end of life. Of course, you have to have the conversation, but then you got to get it down on paper. So you do that through a document called the Advance Directive, giving the person who is named as the agent for power of attorney detailed instructions about what you do or do not want. Again, we really want to encourage families or advocates to be advocating for the specific values, preferences, wishes of the person who's living with dementia. So this does require having conversations before, of course, they're in the late stage of the disease. The pulsed form is the image that you see on the screen there. It's usually printed on bright pink paper so that it is easily recognizable to the first responders or healthcare providers who need it, but it's legal on any color of paper. It doesn't have to be pink. The physician's order for life-sustaining treatment is a double-sided document. You can get it free. We can, at the end, I may actually have that in our list of resources and in the slide deck. If not, we can get it to you. This is a free document. You fill it out. It gives specific directives, what you want with regard to not just CPR, but antibiotics, feeding tubes, ventilators. You have space to write in other details if you want. You bring this to the doctor, have a conversation with the doctor about it, and then they sign it. It's actually a physician's order. So unlike things like DNRs, it works everywhere. It's valid in your home. It's valid if you're in the hospital. It's a standing physician's order. So a nice way to sort of further ensure that a person's wishes will be followed in a medical emergency, when otherwise sometimes wishes get thrown out the window in the name of like doing everything we can to CYA, if you will. I get questions a lot about the End of Life Options Act, which is the physician aid in dying law that we have here in California. I'll keep it brief, just to say it is not applicable to persons with late stage dementia for a variety of reasons. If you have questions about that, we're happy to answer them. But this physician's aid in dying is not an option, is not available for people with late stage dementia, because you have to verbally request it twice, and you have to be able to self-administer that medication, and that is not usually the case for most people in the late stage of dementia. So let's talk about palliative and hospice care. These are two very important concepts of medical care that we have here in the United States, but they are sorely underutilized as supports and resources. So we really want to make sure you know that how you're eligible for them and how to access them. So they really provide not just physician care, but this range of different types of support that center around the patient and key members of their family or their support system as well. Hospice care is not just for the person who is dying. It is for everyone in their sort of circle. So we'll start with palliative care. This is specialized medical care that is designed to address pain. That's a very big topic, right? It addresses physical pain, it addresses emotional suffering, spiritual pain through medication or other forms of therapy. It is not just for people who have a terminal illness. It is for people who have pain, right, caused by some type of an illness. So palliative care is something that can be ordered for people at any age, at any stage of an illness. And if you are seeking curative treatment for a condition, you can also use palliative care. It's pain control, right? But it's not just the administration of physical or medications for physical pain, right? It also addresses those other types of emotional suffering. So there's a nice quote. Vitas is a large corporation that provides palliative and hospice care throughout the country. They have a really great and very informative website. So I've quoted them a couple of times here. It says, thinking of dementia as a terminal illness from which people are dying over years instead of months allows one to focus explicitly and aggressively on a palliative care plan. I think that's a really precise way of pointing out people with dementia are often eligible for palliative care services. So you can request this when a person is hospitalized. You're just asking for a palliative consult, or you can ask this of the primary care physician, or if you're straight Medicare, you can actually self-refer for palliative care services. Hospice care is something different. Hospice is not a place, it's a type of care, a concept of interdisciplinary care that is delivered wherever the person lives. So if that's home, if that's assisted living or memory care, if it's a hospital, right? Hospice comes in and provides comfort and support to the person with the life-limiting illness, and Alzheimer's and other types of dementia, as we have described, are life-limiting illnesses. But it also provides that support to families. So there's physical medical care that is provided for comfort, but there's also all of those other types of support that you saw on that visual before. There's social work services, there's chaplaincy. Often there are ancillary therapies provided, aromatherapy or pet therapy, for example. A whole host of different types of therapies that can be brought to where the person is. Hospice is ordered when a person is no longer seeking cure or treatment for the condition. So unlike palliative care, it's not provided alongside curative treatment. It is ordered when a person has made the decision, we're no longer trying to fight or treat or cure this illness. We just want to have as good of a quality of life as possible with the time that is left. Hospice is a Medicare benefit, and for people that don't have Medicare, hospice can be provided through traditional health insurance as well. Hospice is generally provided at absolutely no cost to the individual, and unfortunately, as I said, it's really underutilized still in the US. I think the last time I looked it up, the average person is on hospice for about 7 days before they die, when in fact they probably were eligible many months before. So a person is eligible for a referral to hospice if their physician thinks it's feasible that they're within the last 6 months or so of their life. That's, who knows? They don't have crystal balls and they don't know that a person is for sure. But if that's reasonable, then a hospice referral can be made. There is confusion about whether or not dementia is a hospice eligible diagnosis, and it is, but a person does have to meet some specific criteria. Medicare sets out, the federal government sets out these guidelines, but most people in late stage dementia are going to meet one or more of the criteria that you see here, right? Being unable to complete their activities of daily living, unable to communicate meaningfully, right? Not having access to more than a handful of words. Intercurrent illnesses associated with advanced dementia, meaning they're having recurrent infections, for example, impaired nutritional status, losing weight, being unable to take in food and liquid normally, or other comorbidities that are significantly impairing their functionality. So it's not difficult to get a person with late stage dementia referred and connected to hospice services. So don't be afraid to ask about it. Don't wait for the doctor to bring it up. They don't always bring it up. It's not something every healthcare provider is comfortable talking about. So ask if you're interested in knowing more about it. You can reach out to a hospice directly and they can talk to the doctor about getting the referral if that's necessary, right? So don't be afraid to make that request or just go after the referral yourself. Every hospice has a set of admissions procedures. They will talk you through it. They'll generally send out an admissions coordinator and eventually a nurse to go out and just confirm that the person is eligible and talk with you, whoever is in the support system, the decision makers, about the services. And then I just want to make sure you know that you can be recertified for hospice. So if you've been on hospice for 6 months and you're still alive because the hospice services are making you feel better and you're functioning better, that doesn't mean that you lose that benefit. There's a recertification procedure that you have to go through every 3 or 6 months. Any questions there? How are we doing on time? We're up against our time here. So maybe I'll hold off on questions, or I can't hear you.
Sorry, we're okay.
Okay, great. So let's wrap up and talk about coping and resources for coping. Again, with grief, there's just no one way that this is going to happen. There's no universal timeline that we can tell you to expect, and there's no universal experience for what your grief process is going to look like. So just let that stuff go. Let go of your own expectations, but let go of everyone else's too, right? Whatever other people are telling you, you should or should not be doing, right? Trust your instincts there. Just allow yourself to feel whatever you're feeling, to feel it fully, right? But keep that contained if you can, right? Sometimes let yourself feel it all the way. Go deep, have lots of pain, give it a good cry, laugh, right? Whatever you need to do to process it. But also have the support that you need to be able to kind of turn your attention in a different direction for even just a few moments at a time. You need to, what kind of support you need. But if you don't have it, let us help you identify those sources of support. It can be people that are already natural sources of support in your life, or there are lots of professional resources out there that we can help you with in terms of counseling. This is the wonderful thing about hospice, is it provides counseling resources, not just for the person who's dying, but for the members of their support system as well. Think about the things that make you feel good. We spent all this time today talking about the things that make the person with dementia feel good. Make a list for yourself too of the stuff that really sort of fills your cup and gives you what you need to go on in the caregiving journey, but also that will sustain you when the caregiving journey is over. What are the things that make you feel good? One of my colleagues put this list together, and I really love it. She thought of things I never would have thought of: organizing the tools in your garage. Right? Think about what are those things that just make you feel comfortable and make you feel good. These days, it's much harder for us to get together physically, have coffee with someone that we know and love, but can you plan some kind of a virtual get together? Are you a member of a support and discussion group? If you are not already, please get in touch with us. We can help you identify one. So I'll ask you to be thinking, making notes to yourself about the things you can be doing to take care of your own health now, not waiting, but thinking about if you're not getting enough sleep, if you're not eating well, if you feel your blood pressure ticking up, right? Think about those things that feed you, that keep you healthy. And if you're looking at that list and thinking there is just no way, right? That's what we're here for. Reach out. We'll talk with you about building more support, helping you find access to home health services, hospice services that might help, but also just plain old respite opportunities to have a volunteer come for a few hours and help you just, get away, or at this time, make a virtual visit for a few hours and give you an opportunity to sort of clear your mind and get away if you can. So here are those resources that I mentioned, and yes, POST is on it. The California Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services has all the sort of details about hospice benefits and eligibility. The Coalition for Compassionate Care of California and POST. These are wonderful resources for learning more about ways to have these conversations, what are those important points to be hitting in those conversations, and of course, what to get into those documents. And then the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization has great information about those two healthcare resources that we talked about. This is us at Alzheimer's San Diego. If you aren't familiar with us, we are a local nonprofit organization headquartered in the Kearny Mesa part of San Diego, but serving the whole county. And of course, now that we're virtual, we serve anybody. So our services, we have moved most of our supports and services online. We have a whole host of services that are all free and available to anyone who needs them. If you live in San Diego or you care about someone who does, we're here for you. So we've got counseling services. You've obviously found our online education program. I mentioned the importance of support and discussion groups. We've got, that's an outdated number there. We've actually got about 25 different support groups meeting online now via Zoom. We can arrange for virtual Alls companion respite visits where a friendly volunteer will log in to Zoom or FaceTime, however you choose to do it. Our tech team can help you get set up, and then you can have these sort of friendly visits. This is a nice way to incorporate things like physical activity or doing reminiscence, stimulating activities. Give yourself a break and let somebody else do that for a little while. A really nice resource, please. Jean is going to put a link in the chat to the request form that you can use to reach out and ask our social workers to get in touch with you with more information about any of these services. Our Movement in Motion program, if you are in need of more masks or a mask, cloth facial coverings. We've got volunteers that are sewing those and can mail some out to you. Members of our tech team, like Martin, who's been with us here today. Thanks again, Martin, for being here to help. They can help you with setting up those virtual Alls companion visits or whatever other technology you need in order to help you stay connected to the people you need to stay connected to. They are more important than ever while we're also isolated. So you can visit our website for more information. We've got some good tip sheets, or reach out and let our social workers, just give us a call, tell us what you need. Or if you don't know what you need, that's fine too. Just call and say, I need to talk to somebody. You can reach us by phone. You can send us an email. You can actually just live chat on our website. There's a little box that pops up, and a member of our staff is there and can answer a quick question, or again, connect you to a social worker if you need it. The link to request follow-up from one of our social workers will be going out in the chat. Jean, do you want me to do that? I can take care of that right now.
I've got it right now.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see it. Okay. All right. So when this webinar ends, you are going to when the webinar ends, on the little window will pop up. It will take you to a quick survey. We'd love your feedback on this program, suggestions you have for this one or for other programs in the future. Yes, copies of the materials from today will be going out in an email. And this program is being recorded. So as long as the recording went smoothly, in a day or two, a recording of this webinar will be available on our website. We have a webinar library on the education page of our website. So check back if there's, if you want to rewatch or you want to send this to someone else that you know. Here are the dates and times of those next two education programs that I mentioned: communication skills on July 16th and legal and financial basics on July 21st. The details and the links to sign up for those are all on our website. And Jean has sent out the link in the chat for the little form that you can, it's confidential and it's secure. You can fill it out, let us know the best way to reach you, and a member of our social work team will follow up and connect you with whatever you need. So with that, unless there's anything pressing, Jean, I will wrap it up. We'll close it out. I know we've gone a little over on time. We apologize for that. Big topic, hard to cover.
For any questions that remain, just I've sent out our web address and email, just as Amy pointed out, and our phone number. Please just give us a call.
Great. Thank you. Well, with that, we will wrap up. We thank you for attending. We thank you so much for your beautiful shares and comments and suggestions and tips for each other in the chat. I was trying to keep an eye on some of that while the webinar was going. It's beautiful to see a lovely example of just how important having community, having a network of support really is. Thank you for your insightful and important questions, and just for coming today. We know this is a hard topic, and we appreciate your being here. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.